At the end of January, a blizzard envelopes Hangzhou. The West Lake has turned silver white overnight. Groaning under the weight of the piles of snow, thousands of plants living around the West Lake are struggling to avoid being crushed. This tree has been uprooted by the snowstorm, but people are helping it stand tall again. As a large, ancient landscape garden, the West Lake's essence lies in its plants, all of which need care and protection from people. People say that a garden loses its soul if you remove the plants. Gardens reach out to people through their plants, which put the finishing touches on these places of natural beauty. Chinese people created a form of nature consisting of a harmonious mix of plants, mountains, rivers and architecture called gardens. China is home to about 35,000 plant species. 1/10 of these are selected and cultivated as garden plants. These plants have become the close companions of people living in this land, and this friendship with plants has been passed down as an integrated part of Chinese culture, exerting a strong influence on gardens worldwide. So, how did gardens come into being? About 140 million years ago, the planet enjoyed a warm, humid climate with a profusion of wetlands. Lotuses flourished in this body of water. They are one of the oldest flowering plants on Earth. The Nelumbonaceae family was once 12 species strong, but only 2 of them survived the devastation of the Ice Age. The lotus we are familiar with is one of the 2 species still living today. After millions of years of evolution, lotuses have been hardened by various hostile environments. The secret is hidden in their seeds. This lotus seed is more than 1,000 years old. The pores on the seed's outer shell were once open, but now they're closed after having been buried underground for 1,000 years. The hard shell consists of 2 layers, which are tightly bonded together, protecting the seed from the hazards of the outside world. The shell's main task is to ensure the safety of the new life inside. All the energy and nutrients it needs are sealed and locked away inside. No matter what changes affect the outside world, the baby can stay safe inside this cozy home and never need to worry about its future. It's waiting for the best chance to germinate in favorable environmental conditions. The seed starts to swell, the pores open to absorb fresh water and air, and the new life that has been sleeping for 1,000 years begins to awaken. The new leaves are too weak to stand up on their own, so for now, they just float on the water. Luckily, as the dominant species here, they have free access to all the light they need. They proliferate across the lake. In less than 2 months, the young seedlings have grown into a sea of green leaves. Flower buds sway above the leaves, ready to conceive new life. Generally speaking, they have 3 to 5 days to complete this important task. The flowers open themselves to the rays of the morning sun. The stigmas inside the flower are waiting for pollen grains, which will be fertilized and grow into new plants. With the help of wind and insects, pollen grains are collected from the stamen and deposited on the stigmas. There are at least a dozen stigmas in each flower. To produce as many seeds as possible, the flower tries to stay open for as long as it can. The petals gently close at noon, protecting the receptacle within from the midday sun. These flowers may encounter a lot of difficulties in their lives: strong winds, pouring rain, and enemies that lurk underwater. Today is the final day. The flowers must seize their chance and bloom to the full while they still can. Tomorrow, the petals will start to fall from the receptacle in order to preserve energy and nutrients for the seeds. The stigmas standing on the bright yellow receptacle turn brown, signaling the completion of the fertilization process. The receptacle swells in size and becomes a lotus seed pod. Next, the lotuses devote themselves to their seeds. A new cycle of life begins. Lotus seeds packed with nutrients have become a popular food amongst Chinese people. They have been cultivating this plant extensively for centuries. Throughout the course of history, this ancient plant has constantly awed people with its beauty. Lotuses are highly respected in China as a symbol of purity, a characteristic shaped by the structure of their leaves. With the help of a microscope, you can see that the surface of the lotus leaf is covered in dewy papillae. These nanometer-sized bumps are like hill chains, actively repelling water from their tiny slopes. When drops of water fall onto the leaf, they are forced to roll off, taking any fine dust on the leaf away with them, so that the leaf can breathe freely through its pores. The petals have a similar water-repellent outer covering, protecting the reproductive organs inside. Like a fortress that shuts its door to water and pollutants, the lotus species has become a symbol of integrity and cultural purity in China. Zhou Dunyi, a writer in the Song Dynasty, praised lotuses for rising from the mud yet remaining unstained. But he wasn't the first fan of this plant. Buddhism was introduced to China more than 1,000 years before Zhou wrote down his words of admiration. In Buddhist texts, the heavenly Western paradise is full of lotus flowers, rising and blooming above the murky water to achieve enlightenment. The murky water symbolizes earthly attachments in Buddhism. It encourages people to let go of their obsession with material possessions, to pursue ultimate enlightenment and achieve inner peace. In the birthplace of Buddhism in China, the word lian is used as an umbrella term for lotuses and water lilies. As more people converted to Buddhism, this beloved freshwater flowering plant naturally became the embodiment of holiness in China. One lotus flower houses a whole sacred world. About 1,500 years ago, Buddhist master Hui Yan came from eastern Jing and planted lotuses around Donglin Temple at the foot of Mount Lu. This plant is still loved and admired by Chinese people today. This old lady has always been a fan of lotuses. Now in her 90s, Jiang Xinyang has studied lotuses all her life.
There were only around 30 varieties back in the 1950s. We collected as many as we could, and the number of varieties was increased to 806 through crossbreeding. Now there are over 1,000 different varieties. 64 petals.
Jiang Xinyang has devoted herself to the collection and cultivation of lotus varieties for more than 50 years. And thanks to the joint efforts of countless researchers like her, this ancient plant now enjoys unprecedented vigor and diversity. As one of the most common flowering plants in China, lotuses flourish as the central feature in gardens in the heat of summer. A Chinese garden is not complete without a pond, and a pond is not complete without lotuses. Chinese garden designers believe this plant to be the soul of a lake. You can easily find their flowers swaying above peaceful water in China. It could be said that lotuses rule the water features in Chinese gardens, but there is another fragrant herbaceous plant that was an essential acquisition for refined scholars in China. The orchid has traditionally been associated with scholars in China. It is a symbol of grace and wisdom. With long, slender leaves and delicate flowers, the orchid enjoys great popularity in China. Fascinated by Chinese culture, Louis Madriz came to China from Costa Rica. Deeply interested in the traditional lifestyle of scholars in Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces, Louis learns to burn incense, play the guqin, and admire the orchids in Xu Yunhe's studio.
Orchid fingers are hand gestures used in Peking opera. This is called embracing the wind. This is called holding dew, like a leaf does. The fragrance of orchids is light and very pleasant. Smell it. It's lovely. It smells really nice. That's not the right way to smell an orchid, you know? You must let the breeze carry the scent over.
Louis is not unfamiliar with orchids. Costa Rica is also home to many orchid species, but Louis remembers them as wild and flamboyant plants, totally different from the orchids he found in China. The orchid family is one of the largest families of flowering plants, with about 28,000 species. Compared with their bright, vivacious foreign cousins, orchids in China are unpretentious introverts. Plants take on the characteristics of their native lands and often reflect the taste of their owners. Chinese scholars have long been besotted with orchids from their homeland. Orchids are found in their bedrooms and living rooms, on their desks and bookshelves, even when the plants are not flowering. What makes these plain-looking orchids so captivating that they become one of the most popular garden plants? Orchids are pretty common plants in China and can be found everywhere in the wild. They thrive not far away from human habitation, but it requires a bit of luck to chance upon wild orchids growing deep in the mountains and forests. It's hard to distinguish orchids from common wild grasses when they're not blooming, as they prefer to blend into the crowd. This humid, shady broadleaf forest has been home to orchids for millions of years. Sunlight is largely blocked by a thick canopy of tall trees, and springs increase the levels of moisture in the soil. The slightly acidic soil is inhabited by fungi that break down dead wood and rotting leaves.
If there's lingja, then orchids are probably nearby.
This is also a paradise for orchids, who depend on their fungi symbiote.
I've spotted one here. Oh, there are 2 yellow margin orchids here.
Orchids are not eye-catching plants, but the lingering fragrance they give out when they blossom is enticing to passerby. Their aroma is not their only strength. The environment they grow in has also contributed to the beautiful image that people associate them with. Although they grow in rarely visited forests and valleys, orchids still bloom to the full. In the eyes of Chinese scholars, this represents a spirit of independence that does not succumb to outside pressures. For them, the plant serves as a reminder of the need for self-cultivation. Orchids were cultivated in private gardens at least as early as the Song Dynasty. Taken from their spacious forests, orchids were now forced to grow in pots, which were far too small for their strong, well-developed roots. To make sure they survived and thrived in their new homes, people had to make things more comfortable for them. The root system of an orchid will keep expanding its territory at every opportunity. It will keep putting out new shoots, as its instinct tells it to. But the pot has limited space, so people must remove any new shoots regularly to solve the problem.
I need to find out where the new shoots are growing out and separate them from the older ones. Then cut off any roots that have stopped working.
After the roots are trimmed, the wounds must be disinfected or the plant may fall ill and die.
These are water crystals from Japan, mixed with soil from Mount Emei, dried leaves from the red horse chestnut tree, peat soil from northeast China, and perlite to give the potting soil a fluffier texture.
Orchids grow best in moist, humus-rich soils in forests, which is produced through a complex process involving weathering and natural erosion. People can only try to recreate the sort of environments where orchids thrive in the wild. The orchid settles down in its new home, which resembles a miniature mountain forest. Cultivated, appreciated and praised by intellectuals across China, orchids have become a cultural symbol in the country. Their leaves give off the feeling of simplicity and weightless grace that is found in traditional Chinese arts. Orchid-themed paintings were popular in the Song Dynasty, a time when subdued colours and simple elegance were celebrated. The Song Dynasty was an age of intellectual pursuits, where one's preference for plants was believed to reflect one's moral integrity. In the eyes of Song scholars, orchids represented the highest level of self-cultivation, living with integrity and dignity, regardless of outside opinion. The Chinese character for orchid, Lan, first appeared in writings more than 3,000 years ago, and was originally used as an umbrella term for all the fragrant herbaceous plants. But since orchids were so popular among men of letters, this character, which symbolizes grace and beauty, became a name bestowed solely on this beloved plant. Plants became associated with people for various different reasons. For example, some plants produce edible fruits. That was how the Chinese plum attracted people's attention. Chinese people started eating plums 7,000 years ago, perhaps earlier. Plums were used to make a seasoning which imparted a flavour similar to vinegar. Now, people make refreshing plum wine by steeping plums in liquor. A plum tree is not only a source of delicious food, but also a sight that is pleasing to the eye as it changes with the seasons. Appreciated for their tasty fruits, this plant species also started to appear in private gardens. We don't know when this tradition began exactly, but records show that plum trees were planted in the imperial gardens during the Han Dynasty, and maybe earlier. The tree's popularity increased over time. The Song Dynasty was an age of ascetic achievements. A Song poet living by the West Lake authored the following lines: "As the moon ushers in the night, the water mirrors the plum trees, leaving trails of their scent floating in the air." This poet never married and led a secluded life by the West Lake, planting plum trees. Some people say that's how he saw the trees as his wife. Today, around the grave of the poet Lin He Jing, his beloved plum trees have been flourishing for nearly 1,000 years, accompanying him in his eternal sleep. Influenced by Lin He Jing, the plum tree has become a popular subject in Chinese literature. But the plum tree's popularity became even more widely spread after a hugely significant historical event took place in China. The Jing incident. It was one of the most turbulent times in Chinese history. In 1127, the Song ruler, Emperor Qinzong, was captured by the Jin force, along with his father, which marked the end of the northern Song Dynasty, and many Han Chinese fled to the south. Forced to leave their homes and seek shelter in the south, the Song people refused to submit to the fate imposed on them. They needed a symbol that could inspire and unite hearts to reclaim their lost homeland. Then they noticed the plum flowers. The long winter is drawing to an end. Although still covered in ice and snow, the plum flowers are getting ready to bloom. The intense cold is not a problem for them. They can blossom at temperatures that are deemed too low for many other plants. While other flowers are discouraged by the cold weather, plum flowers open themselves up to the world. When all hope seemed lost, the Song people were inspired by the sight of these brave flowers. They became a symbol of pride and dignity. In his book on plum flowers, Fan Chengda wrote that plum trees should be a gentleman's first choice. Before or during the Song Dynasty, plum trees were introduced to private gardens in China, symbolizing the nation's unbendable spirit. Numerous scholars have praised the plum tree as an embodiment of noble character, and this much-lauded plant was introduced to even more places. People soon realized that the tree was as resilient as its flowers. This 600-year-old plum tree has lost the core of its trunk, but it still blooms and bears fruit every year. Most plum trees over 100 years old suffer the same fate. Their trunks are prone to damage caused by insects or long exposure to humid air. Like most trees, the bark of the plum tree is responsible for transmitting nutrients. As long as the bark remains intact, the hollow tree can receive a stable supply of water and nutrients. Such amazing traits of resilience and self-renewal awed people and gave rise to a unique type of art. Instead of aging and eventually dying a natural death, some plum trees are selected to be used in a form of Chinese art called pimei. Pimei, which literally means split plum, involves cutting off the upper half of a selected plum tree, splitting the lower half in two in the middle, and grafting flowering branches from other plum trees onto the plant. The finished product is a weathered trunk crowned with new branches. The tree was awake during the surgery. The split trunk tree can still support the growth of new branches, which were cut from young trees aged between 1 and 2 years old. Grafting is quite similar to organ transplantation, and the whole process must be finished within a short space of time. Wounds exposed to the air quickly lose water in the form of vapor, so a quicker surgery means a better chance of survival for the plant. The new branches are attached to the big trunk, turning the tree into a combination of young and old wood. Now it's just a matter of waiting for the two parts to grow into one. They need to rely on their own innate energy to heal their wounds. The trunk and branches work together well, transmitting nutrients and converting light into energy respectively. The following spring, the reinvigorated tree blooms once again. The classical gardens of Suzhou is the biggest stage for Pimei art. This seemingly lifeless tree trunk is surrounded with branches dotted with flowers. Pimei's art aesthetic value lies in the stark contrast between life and death. Perhaps this form of art was created to illustrate the cycle of life and death and the power of life. These potted plums showcase a philosophical attitude towards life. Death should not be feared, as death is a part of life. Chinese people admire flowers that bloom in the snow and hollow trees that still stand strong. As a nation that has endured so much suffering and misery, the Chinese people can easily relate to this tree species. People in China connect the plum tree with qualities such as resilience, strength of will and bravery, which also define their nation. The flowering season draws to a close as autumn advances. Most of the plants in the garden are preparing for their approaching winter slumber. As other plants are leaving the stage, it's time to greet a new character. As a fall-blooming flower, the chrysanthemum presents a delightful sight. It first appeared in Chinese people's gardens about 2,000 years ago. What has kept this herbaceous plant so high on the list of must-have garden plants for such a long time? We don't know when the chrysanthemum was first cultivated, but it is believed to have been domesticated by Chinese people. In the beginning, it was used to remind farms of the arrival of autumn. It began to be held in higher esteem after it was introduced to the Imperial Garden in Beijing. It is recorded that Beihai Park was the place where the chrysanthemum was cultivated for the imperial family starting in the Ming Dynasty.
This row of flowers is not bad. There are purple ones, yellow ones, and pink ones. Now, if you look at them from this angle, you can see they're neatly organized.
Now, the park hosts a famous chrysanthemum enthusiast club. The members inherited their skills from the imperial cultivators. Today, Liu Jiang, a member of the club, and his young apprentices are still focused on the cultivation of the chrysanthemum. They have revived many ancient varieties which once bloomed in the former imperial gardens several hundred years ago. The chrysanthemum won the hearts of the imperial family because of their signature color, It is recorded in the rites of Zhou that the robe worn by the empress is styled in yellow. Golden yellow was first chosen as the colour of robes for empresses. Later it became the colour associated with all royalty in China. Yellow represents the soil in Chinese culture, so yellow chrysanthemums in the garden represents agriculture, the foundation of the country. In Japan, the chrysanthemum, a flower that originated in China, is also associated with the imperial family. The Emperor of Japan is believed to be the descendant of the goddess of the sun in Japanese mythology. The shape of the chrysanthemum resembles the sun emitting light, and the flower is featured on Japan's national seal. Bright yellow is the most common coloured variety of chrysanthemum, but it's not the only one. The chrysanthemum we know today has undergone continuous crossbreeding and improvement. These little yellow daisy flowers growing in the wild are distant relatives of the privileged chrysanthemums that bloomed in the imperial garden. There is much genetic similarity between the two species, as they both belong to the genus Chrysanthemum in the family Asteraceae. 17 plant species of the genus Chrysanthemum are found in China. Crossbreeding occurs naturally on a large scale and in a complex manner, involving both wind and insect pollination. These species have formed a large gene pool, producing new varieties and hybrids. The chrysanthemum has seen a staggering increase in diversity since people started propagating this plant. The chrysanthemums we know today are the result of generations of selective breeding and genetic recombination.
Take this one over there. This one stays. Fetch me a crystal fountain. No, not this one. No pot.
To propagate a new variety, people need to get the parent plants ready in autumn and cross-pollinate them by hand. The newly produced seeds are then planted, and people must wait a whole year before they see whether this gamble has paid off. However, breeding chrysanthemums is a rewarding experience, as it has never let people down.
Whether you have done a good job or not, the hybrid plant will flower in autumn. Not every plant is this generous.
Every autumn, Ye Jialiang is delighted by the sight of hundreds of potted chrysanthemums that he has bred, waiting to be examined and graded personally by him. Then he chooses the best 10 varieties among them to be propagated.
What's the criteria for selecting a new variety? The color, the shape, the quality, and the size.
The plant's large gene pool gives full play to human imagination and the desire to create. This plant allows people to create new varieties at will, which satisfies the part of human nature that constantly craves novelty. The chrysanthemum gives breeders like Ye Jialiang a chance to brighten the autumn garden with more varieties of a plant that harbours infinite possibilities. Thanks to these human efforts, the chrysanthemum has thrived and solidified its position as one of the most popular garden plants in China. It has also been introduced to many more countries worldwide. Today, the plant has more varieties and characteristics than any other species. It is one of the 4 most common flowers in the global cut flower market. There are around 40 species of chrysanthemum worldwide, and the number is still increasing every year. This fall-blooming flower that once grew wild in the fields has delighted royalty and scholars in China and garnered popularity among people worldwide with their ever-changing charisma. The chrysanthemum was introduced to Japan in the 6th century and to Europe by a Frenchman in the 18th century. In the 19th century, Robert Fortune brought more varieties of the plant to Europe from China, and they decorated European gardens with their exotic charm. In fact, increasing numbers of Chinese plants are being appreciated by people overseas. For a century or more, passionate plant collectors from around the world travelled thousands of miles to China, determined to find new plants and bring them home at all costs. This facilitated the spread of Chinese plants to the world. British plant collector E.H. Wilson believed that China was the mother of gardens. He once wrote that, "Of the countries of which our gardens are most deeply indebted, she holds the foremost place." As well as plants, the Chinese ideology of landscaping has been introduced to the world and influenced garden design across the globe in different ways. For centuries, European gardens had been designed to impose order on nature. The explorers who returned from the East brought back a new idea with them. In China, gardens were seen as extensions of nature with subtle differences, and plants in the gardens were arranged to take on a more natural look. Inspired by this ideology, Britain became the first country in Europe to revolt against the accepted formal, symmetrical style. They moved to liberate plants from fixed patterns during the 18th century. The English landscape garden came into being, and the new style soon spread across Europe, giving birth to modern parks. In Japan, garden design and havens of landscaping have also been influenced by Chinese gardens.
Nature has always been a subject for admiration and contemplation in both China and Japan. We are encouraged to explore the truth of the universe when we open ourselves to nature. China and Japan share the same ideology in this respect, which is manifested in different ways.
Chinese plants and literature that were introduced to Japan in the 7th century contributed to making gardening fashionable. As well as drawing artistic inspiration from plants, Japanese people kept enriching their gardens with new elements, especially elements found in Chinese gardens built to the south of the Yangtze River. The Koishikawa Kurakuen, located in downtown Tokyo, is a Japanese garden brimming with Chinese elements. Here you can find Chinese plants like bamboos, plum trees and lotuses, as well as artificial mountains, man-made lakes and pavilions. It's also referred to as the Little West Lake. The West Lake in Hangzhou has long been a unique source of inspiration in Japanese garden design. Many gardens in Japan were built to reproduce the famous scenery of the West Lake. China's West Lake, which is admired by the world, has existed as a paradise for both people and plants for more than 1,000 years. This ancient public garden lies in the heart of Hangzhou, a bustling modern metropolis. It is an open and dynamic land of nature. The lake, the surrounding mountains and plants combine to create some breathtaking scenery. The West Lake is home to more than 3,000 plant species, which creates a kaleidoscope of sights. Ancient gardens in private properties, temples, palaces and modern gardens with varying forms add radiance to each other without engaging in competition. The plants here all have their own stories. First renovated during the Song Dynasty, the West Lake has witnessed the rise and fall of 8 dynasties and ushered in 12 new centuries. The plants here have survived crises, witnessed history, and appeared in the world of art and literature. They have inspired countless artists and poets, and they have been featured in a tremendous number of literary works. The poets were lucky to have met the lotuses, the willows, the plum flowers and the maples. The plants were lucky too, as here they encountered Bai Ju Yi, Su Dongpo, Lin He Jing, Yang Wan Li, Liu Yong, just to name a few famous Chinese poets. Plants, poetry and art have thrived together in China. The people of China should consider themselves lucky too. The beauty of nature has nurtured the splendor of Chinese culture, and this intangible cultural heritage will be passed down to future generations. Today, when people take a stroll around a lake or walk in a Chinese garden, every tree or flower could be an encounter arranged for them by nature. Plants are here to give us strength, offer us comfort, inspire us with beauty, and shape our culture. Gardens are paradise for plants, cradles for art, and embodiments of cultural development and heritage. Several thousand plants have been selected from the 35,000 plant species found in China, and these have decorated our gardens for the last several thousand years. Maybe new plant species will join them in the gardens of the future, adding even more splendor to these man-made landscapes.